My daughter-in-law thought she could humiliate me in front of a room full of strangers. She forgot one thing: I don't play games I can't win. That's how the evening began in my mind. It was a Friday night, and the lakeside restaurant in Willow Creek gleamed with golden lights bouncing off the water. The corporate dinner wasn't mine to host, but my son, Daniel, had insisted I join. He wanted me to meet his colleagues, the teachers and staff from Willow Creek High School, where he worked. I had dressed simply in a navy dress I'd owned for years. It wasn't flashy, not like the designer gown Vanessa Cole, my daughter-in-law, was wearing. Vanessa lived for moments like this: crowds, attention, a chance to be admired. And I already suspected she'd use the evening to prove some kind of point. The room was filled with the clink of glasses, polite laughter, and the faint sound of a piano from the bar. Waiters moved gracefully between tables, pouring wine and setting down plates of salmon and roasted vegetables. Everything was in place for a quiet, polite night. At least, that's what I thought. Vanessa sat across from me, her manicured nails flashing under the warm light as she swirled her wine glass. Daniel sat beside her, smiling nervously at his co-workers. He was proud of her, too proud, in fact, and blind to her sharper edges. The conversation at the table was harmless at first: work schedules, a recent basketball game at the high school, new teaching methods. Then, right at 9, Vanessa tapped her glass with her fork. The ringing sound cut across the table like a bell in a boxing ring. Every head turned. She stood, smile wide, her eyes glimmering with a kind of practiced sweetness that I recognized all too well. Vanessa never smiled unless there was an audience. "Everyone," she began, her voice silky. "I'd like to make a little toast." Polite nods circled the table. Glasses were lifted. She turned her gaze to me, and I knew instantly the target was set. "I want to raise a glass to my dear mother-in-law, Evelyn Hartman," she said, pausing just long enough for all eyes to lock onto me. "She's recently shared some big news. She's unemployed. Again." The word again dripped like poison into the air. Vanessa tilted her head, her blonde hair falling just right for effect. "After leaving her little job for so-called health reasons." She made air quotes, her red nails flashing. "Tell me, Evelyn, how does it feel to be a complete failure at your age?" The restaurant went still. Knives froze mid-cut. A waiter, carrying bread, slowed to a stop. At our table, Daniel's colleagues glanced down at their plates, pretending they hadn't heard. But they had. Everyone had. I sat motionless. I'd buried my husband 3 years earlier. I had spent decades working, saving, and raising a family. And now, here I was, a 64-year-old woman being mocked like a child in front of strangers. Vanessa's lips curved into a smug little smile. She thought she had won. She always thought she was the cleverest person in the room, but cleverness isn't the same as wisdom. I placed my wine glass carefully onto the table. My hand didn't shake. My voice, when it came, was calm as still water. "Well, Vanessa," I said, meeting her eyes directly, "I imagine it feels about the same as learning you'll be evicted from the house you've been living in, rent-free, for 3 years. Her smile faltered. The air changed. Guests leaned in, sensing something they weren't supposed to hear. "What? What are you talking about?" Vanessa stammered. I folded my hands neatly in front of me. "I'm talking about the Willow Creek house, the one you've redecorated, the one you post about on social media, calling it yours. That house doesn't belong to Daniel. It belongs to me. It always has." Daniel's fork slipped from his fingers and clattered onto his plate. His colleagues shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another. Some hid their smirks behind napkins. I leaned back in my chair. "Funny thing about property records, they're public. Anyone can look. And if you had, you'd know. The deed has one name, mine, Evelyn Hartman, not Daniel, not Vanessa, mine." For a second, Vanessa's face went blank, like a mask had been ripped away. You can't do that," she sputtered. Oh, but I already did. I kept my voice light, almost amused. When Daniel couldn't qualify for the mortgage. Because of his student loans, I bought the house outright. Cash. Your names were never on it. Daniel's face flushed red. Mom. What? I turned to him gently. Sweetheart, didn't your wife tell you? I didn't want you burdened with debt. I wanted you to have a place to start your life. So I bought it. For you both to live in. But make no mistake, it's mine. The silence stretched. Every eye at the table was on us. On me. On Vanessa. I stood slowly, smoothing my dress. My voice carried clearly across the linen-covered table. Vanessa, you've been particularly nasty tonight, so let me be perfectly clear. You and Daniel have exactly 30 days to pack your things and find another place to live. I suggest you start looking for something you can actually afford on your yoga instructor's part-time salary. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Around the table, I saw the reactions ripple, raised eyebrows, tight smirks, colleagues whispering to their spouses. Nobody had much love for Vanessa. She was known for her arrogance, for alienating people with little comments, little digs. Tonight, she had finally overplayed her hand. You can't just throw us out, Vanessa said finally, her voice trembling. I turned my head slightly, my smile returning. Actually, I can. Her face drained of color. Daniel sat frozen, staring at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. Torn between two loyalties, his wife and his mother, his eyes darted back and forth, searching for an answer, but there was none to be found. The piano in the bar played on softly, the clinking of dishes returned, but at our table, silence reigned, and for the first time that evening, it wasn't me who felt humiliated. It was Vanessa. The night didn't end there. After the toast collapsed into stunned silence, the dinner limped along. Waiters served dessert, but most people only picked at their plates. Conversation became shallow, awkward. A few of Daniel's co-workers excused themselves early. Vanessa kept her eyes down, cheeks flushed. The swagger she'd worn at the start of the evening was gone. She looked smaller now, diminished. Daniel said little. His jaw was tight, his hand gripping the fork as though it were the only thing anchoring him to the moment. I didn't need to say more. I had made my point. When the night ended, Vanessa stormed toward the car without a word. Daniel lingered for a moment, eyes clouded with confusion and shame. "Mom," he whispered, "why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because it was never about the house, Daniel," I said softly. "It was about respect. And tonight, your wife decided to strip me of mine in front of everyone. I gave her my kindness. She chose to answer with cruelty. So now, she'll have to live with the consequences." He swallowed hard, nodded once, and walked away. When someone disrespects you in your own home, you don't argue. You draw a line they can't cross. That was my decision after the disaster at the Willow Creek restaurant. I had given my daughter-in-law, Vanessa Cole, every chance to behave like a decent human being. She'd chosen cruelty instead. So that night, after the plates were cleared and the murmurs of gossip followed us out into the parking lot, I told her the one thing she never expected to hear. "You have 30 days. After that, you and Daniel will be gone from my house." The words echoed in my ears the whole ride home. Daniel didn't speak. Vanessa fumed silently in the passenger seat, her nails tapping furiously against the dashboard. I sat in the back seat, calm, almost serene. For once, I felt like I had taken back control. When we reached the house, Daniel tried to stop me in the driveway. "Mom, please," he said, his voice tight with desperation. "She didn't mean it like that. She gets carried away sometimes. Don't make this worse than it already is." I met his eyes. My son, the boy I'd raised to be respectful, now standing between me and a woman who'd mocked me in front of strangers. "Daniel," I said gently but firmly, This isn't about sides. It's about respect. And your wife showed none of it tonight. She's under stress. She's been trying to get her business off the ground. I cut him off with a raised hand. Stress doesn't excuse cruelty. I buried my husband 3 years ago. I've carried this family when no one else could. And I will not sit quietly while she calls me a failure. His shoulders slumped. For a moment, he looked like a child again, caught between right and wrong. 30 days, I repeated. That's not a punishment. That's a boundary. It's time you both built your life on your own terms, without me as your safety net. Vanessa stormed into the house without a word. The slam of the front door shook the night air. The next afternoon, I heard the doorbell. When I opened it, there she was. Vanessa, standing on my porch in designer athleisure, clutching a bouquet of grocery store flowers as if it were a shield. Her makeup was perfect, her hair styled in soft curls. She had rehearsed this. "Evelyn," she said smoothly, forcing a smile. "We need to talk." I stepped aside. "By all means, make yourself comfortable in my house." She walked past me, placing the flowers on the entry table with a practiced grace. It was her classic tactic: appear contrite, soften me, then pivot to excuses. "I just want to apologize for last night," she began, turning to face me. Her eyes widened slightly, adding a touch of fake vulnerability. I was out of line. "Yes, you were," I said simply. Her smile flickered, but she pressed on. "I've just been under so much stress. My wellness loft isn't doing well, and with the holidays coming, everything feels overwhelming." Her words trailed off, hanging in the air like cheap perfume. I tilted my head. "Your wellness loft, the one that's been launching. For 2 years?" She shifted uncomfortably. "Building a client base takes time." I walked toward the kitchen, forcing her to follow. My voice remained calm, steady. "How much money have you and Daniel put into this project? Equipment, marketing, rent? Give me a ballpark figure." Her sneakers squeaked on the hardwood floor. "I don't see how that's relevant. Humor me." She hesitated, then muttered, "Maybe 15,000. I nodded thoughtfully, setting the kettle on the stove. $15,000 on a business that has produced zero visible income, while living rent-free in a $500,000 home you don't own? Her composure cracked. "That's not fair." "Oh, but it is," I interrupted, "because, you see, Vanessa, I know the truth." Her eyes narrowed. "What truth?" I turned, meeting her gaze. "The truth that your loft isn't failing at all. According to your social media, you've been hosting private sessions at some very expensive homes, in wealthy neighborhoods, clients who pay in cash, off the books." Her face drained of color. "Those are just friends," she whispered, "helping me practice." I smiled coldly. "Friends who hand you envelopes? Friends who tag you on Instagram, thanking you for their private sessions with the best instructor in Willow Creek? Friends who mention how much they love not having to drive across town for your services?" The kettle began to whistle softly. "Tell me, Vanessa, rough estimate, how much cash have you made this past year?" Her hands shook. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do." I poured hot water over a tea bag, letting the steam rise between us. "You've been running a tidy little under-the-table business, 6 to 8 sessions a week, at $75 an hour. That's close to $24,000. Untaxed, unreported, fraud, plain and simple." Her voice trembled. "Now, you can't prove anything." "Can't I?" I leaned against the counter, my tone sharp but calm. "Your car has GPS. Your phone tracks your location. Your clients post about you themselves. And I spent 32 years as a financial investigator for the IRS. I don't need your cooperation. I can build the entire case without you." She sank into a kitchen chair, her polished facade crumbling. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. I stirred my tea slowly, letting the silence stretch. "I want you to understand one thing Vanessa, I am not some fragile old woman you can insult and exploit. I am not your doormat. And if you ever speak to me the way you did last night again, I won't just evict you. I'll report every dollar of your unreported income to the IRS. Her eyes widened in fear. You wouldn't. Try me. The whistle of the kettle faded into silence. The only sound in the room was the steady ticking of the kitchen clock. I sipped my tea and let the weight of my words sink in. Later that evening, Daniel came to me alone. His face was drawn, his shoulders heavy, as if he'd been carrying Vanessa's excuses all day. He sank into the old armchair in my living room, the one his father used to sit in. Mom, he began, his voice low. Vanessa told me what you said. About her business. I folded my hands in my lap. And what did she tell you? That you're threatening to report her to the IRS. Over a few yoga lessons. I tilted my head. Daniel, a few lessons at $75 an hour, 6 to 8 times a week for an entire year is tax evasion. It's not a hobby when you're making nearly $24,000 in unreported income. His eyes widened. $75 an hour? You didn't know? I asked softly. He shook his head. She told me she was barely breaking even, that the loft was failing. I leaned forward. The loft she reports on taxes is failing. The business she hides from you and from the government is not. She's been lying to you, Daniel. About the money. About everything. He pressed his hands against his forehead. I feel like an idiot. You're not an idiot, I said gently. You're trusting. There's a difference. But you need to understand, this isn't about a business. This is about dishonesty, about respect, and about how much longer you're willing to live with both missing from your marriage. Silence stretched between us. Finally, I stood, resting my hand on his shoulder. You have 29 days left. Make them count. That was the ultimatum. Not. Just for Vanessa. For Daniel, too. They thought I was a woman who could be mocked into silence. What they were learning, slowly, painfully, was that I was a woman who would never be mocked twice. When people lie, they forget one thing. Lies don't age well. They rot, and sooner or later, the stench fills the room. That was the thought in my mind as the days passed after my ultimatum. Vanessa Cole walked around my Willow Creek home with brittle smiles and forced pleasantries, but the cracks were already showing. Daniel, my son, wasn't blind, though he wanted to be. He noticed the phone calls Vanessa took in hushed voices. He noticed how receipts never matched the stories she told. He noticed her excuses piling up, but loyalty is a heavy chain, and he dragged it behind him with every step. It was on the 5th day after the dinner humiliation that another storm arrived at my door. The doorbell rang just after noon. When I opened it, I found Margaret Cole, Vanessa's mother, standing on my porch like a queen inspecting a servant. She was dressed in a tailored ivory suit, pearls around her neck, every hair perfectly in place. Behind her, her black sedan gleamed in the sunlight, polished as though it had never touched a gravel road. Mrs. Hartman, she said crisply, her voice smooth but sharp, we need to talk. I stepped aside. By all means, Margaret, come in. It seems everyone wants to talk these days. She entered as though she owned the place, her heels clicking against my hardwood floor. I guided her to the living room, where she sat on the couch with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. She didn't waste time. Vanessa tells me you're threatening to evict her and Daniel, Margaret said. Frankly, I find that appalling. They've been living here for years, investing their time and energy into making this house a proper home. They have rights, Evelyn. Rights you can't just ignore. I studied her carefully, noting the flash of arrogance in her eyes. She had raised her daughter well, in entitlement, in manipulation, in the art of spinning half-truths into full-blown performances. Rights? I repeated softly. Margaret, what exactly has Vanessa contributed to this home? She's been managing the household, Margaret replied smoothly. Overseeing renovations, coordinating maintenance, improving the property. With whose money? I asked. Her lips parted, then pressed into a thin line. Every maintenance call, every renovation, every so-called improvement has been paid for with my money, I continued. Vanessa hasn't contributed a single dollar. She's been playing house with someone else's wallet. That's not ownership. That's tenancy. Margaret's confident smile faltered for the first time. She's still your family, she countered quickly. Surely that counts for something. Yes, I said, my tone sharp as glass. It counts for respect, which your daughter has not shown. For a long moment, Margaret sat in silence, her perfect posture unbending even as her argument crumbled. Then she rose, smoothed her suit, and forced a smile. I see. Well, I suppose we'll have to reconsider our options. I walked her to the door. Reconsider quickly. 28 days remain. She left without another word, her car pulling, away with the smooth arrogance of wealth. That evening, I sat alone in my kitchen, sipping tea. The house was quiet, too quiet. Daniel had stayed late at school. Vanessa was upstairs, no doubt scrolling through her phone, pretending nothing had happened. Then my phone buzzed on the counter. A text message. From Vanessa, but it wasn't meant for me. Can't wait to see you tonight. Daniel's working late. Again. We'll have the whole place to ourselves. Wear that cologne I love, Victor. I stared at the glowing screen, the words searing into my mind. My stomach clenched. So this was the missing piece. The business meetings, the unexplained absences, the excuses. It was all there, wrapped in one careless message. I screenshot the text. Then, calmly, I replied, I think you meant to send this to someone else, Vanessa. Be more careful with your phone. The dots blinked almost immediately. Oh, God. Evelyn, I can explain. I set the phone down and waited. 20 minutes later, the front. Docker burst open. Vanessa rushed in, her face flushed, her hands trembling. She didn't look like the polished woman from earlier. She looked like someone cornered. Evelyn, please, she gasped, clutching her phone like a lifeline. It's not what you think. I stood from the table, my voice low but firm. It's exactly what I think. You're cheating on my son, in my house, while he works double shifts to pay for your so-called wellness loft. Her eyes filled with tears, but I'd seen those tears before. They weren't sorrow. They were strategy. How long? I demanded. It doesn't matter. How long? Her voice cracked. 8 months. 8 months. While Daniel defended her, while he stressed over money, while I questioned myself for being too harsh. 8 months of lies. Who is he? I asked coldly. She swallowed hard. Victor Morgan. He owns a construction company, I filed. The name away, sharp as a blade. Does his wife know? Her silence was answer enough. I stepped closer, my eyes locked on hers. So you're not only destroying my son's marriage, but another woman's as well. Evelyn, please, she whispered. If you tell Daniel, it'll destroy him. If you tell her, it'll destroy 2 families. I cut her off. No, Vanessa. You destroyed them. I'm just the one holding the light so everyone can see the wreckage. Tears streamed down her cheeks, mascara staining her skin. What do you want me to do? I opened the front door and gestured outward. You have one choice. You tell Daniel the truth tonight. Or I will tell him tomorrow morning, in front of anyone I need to. Your mother, your father, and Victor's wife. Her knees buckled slightly, her hand gripping the doorframe for balance. That's blackmail, she whispered. No, I said calmly. That's mercy. For once in your life, I'm giving you the chance to do the right thing. Take it or don't. Either way, the truth comes out. She stood frozen, her chest rising and falling in sharp bursts. Oh, and Vanessa, I added, my tone cold as winter steel. Whether you confess or not, You still have 28 days left. Don't forget that. That night, as I locked the door behind her, the weight of what I'd discovered settled over me. Daniel, my gentle, trusting son, had tied his future to a woman who was not only dishonest, but cruel. She had lied about money, mocked me in public, and betrayed him in private. The question wasn't whether Daniel would find out. He would. The question was whether he would finally see her for who she truly was. Betrayal doesn't just break trust. It breaks the mirror you see yourself in. That was the thought running through my mind when I heard Daniel's footsteps outside my bedroom that night. Slow, heavy, weighted with the truth Vanessa had finally been forced to tell him. He knocked, softly. "Mom, are you awake?" I opened the door. My son stood there, looking like he'd aged 10 years in one night. His hair was mussed, his tie loosened, his eyes hollow. He didn't look like a man anymore. He looked like the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, desperate for shelter. "She told me," he said, his voice flat. "She told me about Victor." I stepped aside, and he entered, sinking into the old armchair his father used to sit in. His hands rubbed his face, as if trying to scrub the betrayal away. 8 months, Mom," he whispered. 8 months she's been lying to me. I was working extra hours. I thought she was trying to make the loft work. And all this time, she was with him. In this house. I sat across from him, letting the silence stretch. Sometimes, silence is the kindest thing you can offer. Finally, he looked at me, his eyes red. How did I never see this? How could I be so blind? "You weren't blind," I said gently. "You were trusting, and there's nothing wrong with that." He shook his head violently. "No, I should have known. I should have noticed the late nights, the excuses, the money that didn't add up. She made a fool out of me." "No, Daniel," I said firmly. "She made a fool out of herself. Betrayal says nothing about your worth. It only screams about hers." He swallowed hard, his shoulders trembling. "What am I supposed to do now?" I leaned forward, resting my hand on his knee. "You do what strong men do. You face the truth, no matter how much it hurts. And then you build again, brick by brick, without her lies." His eyes watered, but he nodded slowly. The next day, betrayal took a new form, not from Vanessa this time, but from her parents. At exactly 10 in the morning, a black Mercedes pulled into my driveway. Out stepped Margaret Cole, sharp as ever in another designer suit, and beside her walked Stephen Cole, Vanessa's father. A lawyer. His gray hair was slicked back, his briefcase polished. I was already in the garden, trimming roses. I sat down. My shears wiped my hands and met them at the door. "Mrs. Hartman," Stephen said smoothly, "we need to discuss this situation like adults." I stepped aside, letting them in. "By all means. I always prefer reason. Unfortunately, your daughter doesn't seem to share that preference." They followed me to the living room where Stephen placed his briefcase on the coffee table with a theatrical snap. Margaret sat rigidly, her eyes blazing. Stephen leaned forward. "Vanessa tells us you've given her and Daniel 30 days to leave. We believe that's unreasonable. They've lived here for 3 years. They've contributed time, energy, and resources into maintaining and improving this home. That gives them rights." "Rights?" I repeated, my voice calm. "Do elaborate." He adjusted his glasses. "Sweat equity, implied partnership, equitable ownership. In plain terms, your daughter-in-law has legal standing to claim a share of this property." I sat back, folding my hands in my lap. "Interesting theory. Tell me, Stephen, how much money has Vanessa invested in this house?" "She's coordinated renovations, overseen maintenance." "With whose money?" I interrupted. He hesitated, then glanced at Margaret. "All the paint, all the new furniture, every maintenance bill, every so-called renovation has been paid for with my money," I continued smoothly. Vanessa hasn't contributed a single dollar. She's been living here rent-free, playing house with my son's salary and my bank account. That isn't equity, that's dependency. Margaret's face flushed, her mouth tightening into a thin line. Stephen cleared his throat. Even so, the law recognizes— Actually, I said, standing and walking to my desk drawer, the law recognizes facts, and I happen to keep very tidy records. I returned with a thick folder and set it on the table between us. I opened it slowly, letting them see the neat rows of documents inside. 3 years of rent checks, I said, my voice steady. Every month, Daniel has written me a check. 36 checks, all deposited into my account. Each one marked clearly in the memo line. Rent. I slid one across the table. Stephen's confident smile faltered as his eyes scanned the paper. Margaret shifted uncomfortably in her seat. You see, I continued, your daughter hasn't been a homeowner. She hasn't even been a partner. She's been a tenant, and tenants can be evicted for cause. The room went silent. Stephen cleared his throat again, weaker this time. I wasn't aware of these documents. Of course you weren't, I said, my smile cold. Because Vanessa didn't tell you the truth, just like she didn't tell Daniel, just like she didn't tell me. Lies stacked on lies. That's her foundation. Margaret rose suddenly, her face red. You're cruel, Evelyn, heartless. You're tearing this family apart. I stood too, unflinching. No, Margaret. Your daughter did that? I'm just refusing to be collateral damage. Stephen gathered his papers, his hands stiff. We'll reconsider our options. Do that, I said, walking them to the door. But be quick about it. 27 days remain. They left. Without another word, the Mercedes pulling away faster than it had arrived. That evening, Daniel came into the kitchen as I was washing dishes. His shoulders were slumped, his face drawn. They came here, didn't they? He asked quietly. Yes, I said. He leaned against the counter, running a hand through his hair. What did they say? That you and Vanessa had earned the house, that she had rights. He laughed bitterly. Rights. She's never lifted a finger except to redecorate a room and post it online. All of it was your money, not mine, not hers, yours. I dried my hands and turned to face him. Do you see it now, Daniel? Do you see who she really is? He lowered his head. I do. I didn't want to, but I do. She's been lying about the money, about the business, about everything, and now, about us. I stepped closer, resting a hand on his shoulder. This isn't your fault. Love makes us blind. Trust makes us hopeful. That's not weakness, Daniel. That's humanity. But there comes a point where trust turns into denial, and you've reached it. His voice cracked. I don't know how to let go. You don't need to know today, I said softly. You just need to remember the truth. The woman you married isn't the woman you thought she was. And the man you are is stronger than the one she wanted you to be. He nodded slowly, tears brimming in his eyes. I gave his shoulder a gentle squeeze. 27 days, Daniel. That's all that's left. And when they're gone, so will she be. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet house, I thought about cracks. How they start small, invisible, just a hairline fracture. But left alone, they spread. They weaken the structure until one day the whole thing collapses. Vanessa thought. Her lies could hold. She thought appearances could plaster over the damage. But the cracks were showing. And soon, her entire facade would crumble. The cracks in Vanessa's mask had spread wide, but I didn't yet know how deep they went. That truth came to me on an ordinary afternoon, wrapped in the most unexpected package. My neighbor, Clara Jennings. Clara was not the type to spread gossip lightly. She'd lived 2 doors down for 15 years, a widow like me, practical and steady. When she knocked on my door that Tuesday, her expression wasn't curious. It was grim. Evelyn, she said, stepping into the foyer. We need to talk. And you're not going to like it. Her tone chilled me. What is it, Clara? She sat at my kitchen table, folded her hands tightly, and took a breath. I asked my cousin in Reno for a favor. She works at the county clerk's office there. I wanted to see if there was anything about Vanessa's business registered out of state. Instead, I found something else. She slid an envelope across the table. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a photocopy of a marriage. Certificate, Vanessa Cole, Victor Morgan, married 6 months ago, Reno, Nevada. For a long moment, I simply stared at the paper. My heart pounded in my ears. No, I whispered. She's married to my son. She's married to both, Clara said, her voice heavy. It's bigamy, Evelyn. She's legally tied to 2 men at the same time. I pressed a hand to my forehead. Images flashed through my mind. Vanessa's late nights, the misdirected text, the slip of fear when she'd admitted the affair. It wasn't just adultery. It was a crime. She hasn't just betrayed Daniel, I said slowly. She's betrayed the law. Clara nodded. And there's more. My cousin dug deeper. Victor Morgan's been transferring assets to Vanessa's name. Bank accounts, property shares, even part ownership of his construction company. She pulled out another folder of documents, property deeds, bank statements, signatures scrawled in Vanessa's elegant hand. My breath caught. She's draining them both. Daniel, working double shifts for her fake wellness loft. Victor, funneling assets into her accounts, blind in his infatuation, and Vanessa, standing at the center, pulling from both like a spider draining caught flies. I sank into my chair, the weight of it pressing down on me. How could I have let this happen under my roof? You couldn't have known, Clara said softly. She's skilled, Evelyn, ruthless. She's done this before. I can feel it. Her words proved truer than even she realized. 2 days. Later, the phone rang. When I answered, a steady female voice introduced herself. Mrs. Hartman? This is Detective Laura Chen with the Financial Crimes Division. I believe you may have information relevant to an ongoing investigation. I froze. The papers Clara had given me spread across the table in front of me. Investigation? Yes. We've been tracking a woman named Vanessa Cole Morgan. She's suspected of marriage fraud, bigamy, and financial exploitation. We understand she's connected to your family. My knees nearly gave out. Connected? She's my daughter-in-law. Or at least, she's supposed to be. There was a pause on the other end. Then Detective Chen's voice lowered. Mrs. Hartman, I'm going to be frank. Vanessa is part of a pattern we've been watching. She deliberately targets families like yours, wealthy widows with adult children, vulnerable men who want to start families. She integrates herself, gains access to finances, and then moves on to wealthier targets while keeping the first marriage alive for cover. The room spun slightly. You're telling me, Daniel, we were just one stop on her path? Yes, our records show your family is victim number 7. 7. The number hit like a blow. 7 families destroyed. 7 men deceived. 7 homes poisoned. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. What do you need from me? Documentation. Anything you have. Rent checks, texts, social media posts, financial records. Every piece helps. We're already working with another victim, Rachel Morgan, Victor's ex-wife. She's been building a case for months. Your cooperation could make it airtight. I glanced at the folder in front of me, the copies of checks in my drawer, the screenshots on my phone. You'll have everything. Good, the detective said, because we're close, very close. But we need her cornered before she realizes how much we know. After I hung up, I sat in silence. My house felt different, heavier, as though Vanessa's lies clung to the walls like mold. I thought back to the dinner at the lakeside restaurant, to her smirk as she raised her glass and called me a failure, to the confidence in her eyes, the certainty that I was powerless, And now, here she was, revealed as not just arrogant, not just cruel, but criminal. I walked to the window, staring out at the quiet street of Willow Creek. Neat lawns, children's bicycles and driveways, the kind of neighborhood built on trust, and she had poisoned it. I clenched my fists. Not anymore. That evening, Daniel came home late again. He looked exhausted, his eyes shadowed. I waited until he sat, at the kitchen table, rubbing his temples before I placed the marriage certificate in front of him. "What's this?" he asked, his voice flat. "Proof," I said softly. "She's married to Victor, legally, in Reno." His eyes scanned the document. He blinked once, twice. Then his shoulders sagged as though every ounce of denial had finally drained out of him. "So nothing was real," he whispered. "Not one moment of our marriage. I'm sorry, Daniel." He laughed bitterly. No humor in it. "Don't be. If anything, this makes it easier. For months I thought I failed, that I wasn't enough. But it wasn't me, was it? It was her. It was always her." I reached across the table, covering his hand with mine. "This isn't the end, Daniel. It's the beginning. The start of a life not chained to her lies." His eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw something new, clarity. Later that night, I spread Clara's documents across my dining room table. Property transfers, bank accounts, marriage certificates, a web of deceit carefully woven around two men, my son and Victor Morgan. But Clara had been right. This web stretched further. Vanessa hadn't just stumbled into betrayal. She had designed it, calculated it, perfected it. I thought of Detective Chen's words. Victim number 7. 7 families before us. 7 families torn apart by the same woman. I whispered into the quiet house. No more. The next morning, I called Detective Chen. "I'm ready," I said. "You'll have everything I've got." And I gathered it all. Every check Daniel had written, every text Vanessa had slipped, every screenshot, every receipt. Each piece. A thread in the web that would strangle her lies. For the first time in weeks, I felt steady. Not angry, not humiliated, just resolved. Because now it wasn't just about defending myself, it wasn't just about protecting Daniel, it was about ending her cycle before another family became victim number 8. Some people believe justice is slow, but when it finally arrives, it crashes like thunder. That thunder came to my quiet Willow Creek street on a gray morning, one that began like any other. I was in the kitchen pouring coffee when the sound of engines cut through the air. 2 unmarked cars, then 3, then a police van pulling up outside my house. Daniel appeared from the hallway, bleary-eyed. "Mom? What's going on?" Before I could answer, the knock came, loud, sharp, commanding. I opened the door to find Detective Laura Chen, her badge shining, flanked by officers in dark jackets marked Federal Task Force. "Mrs. Hartman," she said briskly, "we have warrants for the arrest of Vanessa Cole and Victor Morgan. May we enter?" I stepped aside. Behind me, Vanessa was halfway down the stairs, dressed in her flawless athleisure, phone in hand, mid-sentence in some performance for social media. Her face froze when she saw the badges. "What is this?" she snapped, her tone shrill. "Evelyn, what have you done?" The officers moved quickly. One read her rights, while another cuffed her wrists behind her back. Vanessa thrashed, her voice breaking. "You can't do this. I haven't done anything. Daniel." She turned wildly toward my son, her eyes wet and desperate. "Daniel, tell them, stop them. I'm your wife." But Daniel stood frozen in the living room doorway. His face was pale, his hands shaking, his eyes locked on the truth he could no longer deny. "My wife," he whispered bitterly. "You were never my wife." The words landed heavier than the click of handcuffs. Vanessa went still, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. The officers guided her out the door, her designer sneakers scraping against the floor, her voice collapsing into hysterical sobs. Moments later, a second squad car pulled up, and from the driver's seat of a truck parked on the corner, Victor Morgan was pulled out. He looked stunned, disheveled, still in his construction. "Uniform! You can't arrest me for loving someone," he shouted, thrashing against the cuffs. "This is a mistake." Detective Chen's voice was iron. "Victor Morgan, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit asset fraud and aiding and abetting bigamy. You have the right to remain silent." His protests were drowned by the slam of the car door. Neighbors peeked through blinds and from porches. Whispers spread along Willow Creek like wildfire. And I stood at my window, watching both Vanessa and Victor driven away in separate cars, flashing lights reflecting in the glass. For the first time in months, I felt the air lighten. That afternoon, Detective Chen returned. She sat at my kitchen table, legal pad in front of her. "Mrs. Hartman," she said, "we'll need everything you've collected, bank records, rent checks, text messages, screenshots. The prosecution is preparing a sweeping case. Your documentation will make it airtight." I slid the folder across the table. "You'll find every check Daniel wrote, every text Vanessa sent me, and the copies Clara retrieved from Reno. It's all there." Chen nodded, flipping through the files. "This is strong evidence, very strong. Combined with victim testimony from the others, we're looking at federal charges, mail fraud, wire fraud, bigamy, conspiracy." Daniel sat beside me, his head in his hands. "How much damage has she done?" Chen's voice softened. "We're still tallying, but preliminary numbers put the total at around $2.3 million. 7 families exploited, 4 marriages overlapping. She married you, Daniel, while still legally tied to Victor and 2 other men before him." The room went silent. Daniel's face crumpled. 4? God, how could I not see it? I rested a hand on his arm. "Because you saw who you wanted her to be, not who she was. That's not blindness, that's hope. She took advantage of that." Chen closed the folder and stood. "We'll be in touch when the court date is set. Thank you for your courage and for standing firm when others might have stayed silent." The trial was held in Portland, in a federal courthouse with tall stone steps and cold marble halls. I attended every day, sitting in the second row behind the prosecution's table, Daniel beside me. His posture was rigid, his jaw clenched, but his eyes stayed fixed forward. Prosecutor Angela Rivera led the case. She was sharp, precise, every word measured like a blade. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, addressing the jury, "this is not a case of one mistake, one affair, one betrayal. This is a calculated scheme. Over the course of 6 years, Vanessa Cole, also known as Vanessa Morgan, Vanessa Brooks, and Vanessa Hale, entered into 4 simultaneous marriages. She drained assets, falsified tax records, manipulated property transfers, and destroyed 7 families in the process. Her partner, Victor Morgan, aided her in concealing assets and laundering funds through his construction business. Together, they stole $2. $3 million. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. I watched as Rivera presented the evidence. My rent checks, Clara's Reno marriage certificate, bank transfers from Victor to Vanessa, screenshots of texts. Each piece was laid bare like threads in a tapestry of deceit. When Vanessa was brought in, dressed in an orange jumpsuit, she was unrecognizable. The polished hair, the perfect makeup, the designer clothes were gone. What remained was a hollow shell of a woman, her eyes dark, her lips pressed into a thin line. She showed no remorse, not a single tear. Victor sat beside her, his broad shoulders slumped, his jaw twitching with anger. One by one, victims testified. A man in his 50s, widowed like me, describing how Vanessa had charmed him and drained his savings before disappearing. A young father whose mother had been targeted, his voice trembling with rage as he recounted the lies. And then, Rachel Morgan, Victor's ex-wife. She stood with quiet dignity, her voice steady. "She stole my husband," Rachel said, her eyes locked on Vanessa. "She stole my children's future, she stole our security, but she didn't steal my strength. I rebuilt, and I am here today to make sure she never does this to another family again." When she finished, she turned to me and Daniel. Her hand found mine, squeezing firmly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not staying silent, for helping bring this into the light." Daniel's throat tightened, but he nodded, gratitude in his eyes. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Evidence piled higher, witnesses stood stronger, and every layer of Vanessa's lies was stripped away until nothing remained but the truth. When the verdict came, the jury foreman spoke clearly. Guilty on all counts. The sentence was swift. Vanessa Cole, 15 years in federal prison for bigamy, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Victor Morgan, 8 years for asset fraud and aiding her scheme. Neither spoke. Neither apologized. Vanessa stared straight ahead, her expression empty, as though the world owed her even now. Outside the courthouse, the press swarmed. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. Daniel and I stood on the steps, Rachel Morgan beside us. A reporter shouted, "Mrs. Hartman, how do you feel seeing justice served?" I looked straight into the cameras. Justice isn't about revenge, it's about truth. And the truth is, Vanessa Cole built her life on lies. Those lies hurt people. Today, they end. Rachel nodded, her voice firm. And maybe now, the rest of us can begin again. Daniel didn't speak. He didn't need to. The set of his shoulders, the way he stood tall despite the heartbreak, said more than words ever could. That night, back in Willow Creek, the house was quiet. Too quiet. But for the first time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt clean. I walked through the rooms Vanessa had once filled with her laughter, her schemes, her false sweetness. They no longer belonged to her. They belonged to me again and to Daniel. As I turned out the lights, I thought of something my husband once told me. "Evelyn, the truth always wins. It may take time, but it always wins." Tonight, I believed him. Kindness without boundaries is just an invitation for cruelty. That line lingered in my mind as the weeks passed after the trial. The storm had cleared, but the wreckage it left behind was undeniable. Still, the air in Willow Creek felt lighter, fresher, like spring after a long winter. Daniel was the first to make a move. "Mom," he said one evening, his voice quieter, steadier than I had heard in months. "I think it's time I got my own place." We were sitting at the kitchen table, a stack of apartment listings spread between us. He looked nervous, as though he feared I might take offense. I smiled softly. "It's the right step, Daniel. You need a space that's yours. No shadows, no lies, no memories you didn't choose." He exhaled, relieved. "It feels strange, starting over at 32. But maybe it's better than never starting at all." The next week, I helped him pack. We boxed up the remnants of a life he had tried so hard to build with Vanessa. The dishes she picked out, the picture frames she staged, the throw pillows chosen more for appearances than comfort. Daniel left most of it behind. "All this," he said, gesturing at the pile of discarded things. "None of it was real. I don't want to carry it with me." So we filled his car only with what mattered: books, clothes, photographs of his childhood, and one well-worn guitar. When he unlocked the door to his new apartment, a modest 2-bedroom overlooking the river, his shoulders seemed lighter. "It's not much," he said, setting the guitar in the corner, "but it's mine. And this time, no one else gets to script my life for me." I hugged him tightly. "That's all I ever wanted for you, Daniel. A life you own." Back in my Willow Creek home, the silence felt different now. Not empty, not haunted, but peaceful. For the first time in years, I could walk from room to room without feeling someone else's shadow trailing me. I remembered the night at the lakeside restaurant, Vanessa raising her glass and mocking me in front of strangers. Unemployed, dependent, a relic living on her son's goodwill. How wrong she had been. I was not dependent. I was not weak. And when the time came, I had proved it. Through patience, through calm resolve, through evidence collected in silence. Power, I realized, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it waits. And when the moment arrives, it speaks only once, but with finality. The trial had left its mark. Reporters stopped calling, neighbors eventually stopped whispering, and slowly, life in Willow Creek returned to its rhythm. But inside me, something had shifted. I understood now that boundaries are not cruelty. Boundaries are dignity. Vanessa thought kindness was weakness. She thought my silence was surrender. But what she never understood was that love without limits is dangerous. It lets poison seep in. It lets liars thrive. I had loved Daniel enough to fight for him. And fighting, in this case, had meant standing firm, even when it looked ruthless, because sometimes the only way to protect family is to refuse to yield. One evening, Clara Jennings joined me on the porch, 2 cups of tea between us. The sun was setting, painting Willow Creek in gold. "You look lighter," Clara said, sipping. "I am," I admitted. For the first time in a long while, she nodded knowingly. "You did what most people can't. You stood your ground. You protected what mattered." I looked out across the quiet street, children's laughter drifting from a nearby yard. I didn't feel strong at first. When she mocked me that night, I felt small. But strength isn't about feeling powerful every moment. It's about standing firm when it counts. Clara smiled. "And you did." That night, alone in my house, I sat by the fireplace with a notebook. I wrote down the lessons carved into me through this ordeal, not for anyone else, but for myself. Trust is sacred. Don't give it blindly. Kindness is strength, but only when paired with limits. Silence is not surrender. It is preparation. Love requires clarity. And sometimes it requires toughness. As the fire crackled, I wrote the final line that would stay with me forever. Kindness without limits is weakness. Protecting family sometimes means being ruthless. Weeks turned into months. Daniel thrived. In his new apartment, finding joy in small routines, cooking his own meals, strumming his guitar on the balcony, reclaiming pieces of himself he'd lost. Rachel Morgan, Victor's ex-wife, remained in touch, sometimes calling to check in, sometimes just to say thank you again. And me? I found peace in reclaiming my independence. The roses in my garden bloomed brighter. The walls of my home no longer echoed with tension. The house once overshadowed by betrayal now breathed with freedom. I had been mocked as powerless. I had been dismissed as irrelevant. But in the end, it was my resolve, quiet, steady, unyielding, that brought the truth into the light. And so, in Willow Creek, life moved forward, not with noise, not with spectacle, but with peace. Because true victory isn't in proving others wrong, it's in living free from their lies. And that's where this story ends. Evelyn standing stronger than ever, Daniel starting fresh, and the lies that once poisoned their lives, finally buried by truth. If this story spoke to you, if you've ever felt underestimated or silenced, remember Evelyn's lesson. Kindness without boundaries is weakness. Protecting yourself and those you love sometimes means standing firm, even when others call it ruthless. Now, I'd like to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to set hard boundaries, even with family? Share your thoughts. In the comments, I read every single one. If you found value in this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more powerful stories just like this. Until next time, Stay strong, stay clear, and never forget, your voice matters.